Jack stood tall at the gates of the massive mansion, smoothing down his black uniform one last time before pressing the intercom. This job interview was his chance at a fresh start. The ad had promised good pay for an experienced driver, and Jack had years behind the wheel. What he didn't expect was to be working for one of the richest men in the city. "Name?" asked a stern voice through the speaker. "Jack Miller, here for the driver position." The tall iron gates opened slowly. Jack walked up the long driveway, taking in the perfect green lawns and marble fountains. The house itself was huge, all white stone and giant windows. Robert Taylor was a busy man who didn't waste time. The interview lasted 10 minutes. Jack's references were good, and he had a clean driving record. Robert liked his direct answers and the firm handshake. By the end, Jack had the job. "You'll start tomorrow," Robert said, not looking up from his phone. "My assistant will show you where to park and give you the schedule. I expect perfect timing. I hate waiting." Jack nodded. He needed this job badly after months of searching. The pay was better than he'd hoped, and the car, a sleek black luxury sedan, was brand new. As Robert's assistant led Jack through the house to show him the garage, a woman appeared at the top of the grand staircase. Jack stopped in his tracks. She moved gracefully down the steps, her long dark hair falling over one shoulder of her silk blouse. Her eyes, a deep brown, seemed sad despite her smile. "You must be the new driver," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Yes, ma'am. Jack Miller." He gave a slight bow of his head, suddenly aware of his plain clothes next to her elegance. "I'm Emma Taylor, Robert's wife." She extended her hand. When Jack took it, he felt its warmth and softness. Their touch lasted a moment too long before she pulled away. Robert appeared from his office. "I see you've met my wife. You'll be driving her as well when I'm busy. Emma goes to charity events, shopping, her friends' houses, whatever she needs." Emma's smile tightened, "which is most of the time since you're always working." Robert didn't seem to notice the edge in her voice. He checked his watch. "Speaking of which, I have a meeting." "Emma, show Jack what else he needs to know." Without waiting for a response, Robert walked away, already on his phone again. The quick kiss he gave Emma's cheek seemed automatic, without affection. Jack noticed how she didn't lean into it. "I'll show you the car schedules," Emma said after a moment of awkward silence. "My husband likes everything planned to the minute." In the garage, Emma pointed out which car was used for what purpose. The large SUV for family trips, the sports car that was Robert's toy, and the sedan Jack would drive most days. "Robert has everything organized just so," she explained. "He likes control." There was something in the way she said it, a hint of sadness. "How long have you been married?" Jack asked, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, that's too personal." Emma smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. 8 years. It was different at first. He had more time then. Jack nodded, not knowing what to say. He wasn't used to such honesty from someone he just met. "You'll figure it out quickly," Emma continued. "This house runs like a business. Everything has its place and purpose." She glanced around the garage. "Including me, I suppose." Jack wanted to say something comforting but kept quiet. It wasn't his place. Still, he couldn't help noticing the diamond ring that seemed too heavy on her delicate hand, or the way her shoulders dropped when she thought he wasn't looking. As they walked back toward the house, their steps echoed in the large garage. "I hope you'll be happy working here, Jack," Emma said, her voice suddenly brighter, as if remembering her role. "If you need anything, just ask." "Thank you, Mrs. Taylor." "Emma," she corrected him. "Call me Emma when Robert isn't around." "Mrs. Taylor makes me feel old." Jack smiled. "Emma," he repeated, and something changed in the air between them. A small spark, barely noticeable but definitely there. As Jack drove away from the mansion that evening, he thought about his new job. The car, the pay, the house, all better than he'd hoped for. But it was the image of Emma's sad eyes that stayed with him most, and the way they had brightened, just for a moment, when he'd said her name. 2 weeks passed quickly as Jack settled into his new job. He learned Robert's strict schedules and Emma's more relaxed ones. Robert wanted to be at meetings exactly on time, not early, not late. Emma didn't mind waiting in the car while Jack found parking, often telling him not to rush. The first time Jack drove Emma alone was to a charity lunch. She sat in the back seat as proper distance demanded, but halfway there she moved to the front passenger seat. "I hate sitting back there." Makes me feel like a package being delivered, she explained, smoothing her dress. The light floral scent of her perfume filled the car. Jack kept his eyes on the road. Whatever makes you comfortable, Emma. After that, she always sat in the front when Robert wasn't there. Their talks started small, about the weather, traffic, the city. But soon, Emma began sharing more. Take the long way today, she said one afternoon after a short shopping trip. Robert won't be home until late anyway. Jack nodded, turning away from the direct route home. They drove along the coastline, windows down slightly. Emma looked more relaxed than he'd ever seen her, eyes closed as the breeze played with her hair. I used to paint, you know, she said suddenly. Before I married Robert. Landscapes mostly. Why did you stop? She shrugged. Robert thought it was a nice hobby but not serious. The paints made a mess in his perfect house, she smiled sadly. It's easier to just do the charity work he approves of. Their drives became longer. Emma would ask Jack to stop at a small cafe or park. Sometimes they'd walk a little, keeping proper distance, talking about books they'd read or places they wanted to see. One rainy Tuesday, Jack drove Emma to her friend's house for lunch. When he returned to pick her up, she came out looking upset. Just drive, please, she said, her voice tight. Her eyes were red. Jack pulled away from the curb. Are you okay? Lisa is getting divorced, Emma said after a long silence. Her husband was having an affair with his secretary, such a stupid cliché. She stared out the window at the rain. The funny thing is, she's not even sad about the affair. She's sad they stopped talking years ago. She said they became strangers living in the same house. Jack heard what she wasn't saying. That sounds familiar to you. Emma didn't respond right away. He worried he'd crossed a line. Then she sighed. Robert and I haven't had a real conversation in months. Sometimes I wonder if he'd notice if I disappeared. Jack pulled the car to the side of the road and turned to her. He would be a fool not to notice. Emma looked at him, surprise in her eyes. Jack immediately looked away, gripping the steering wheel. He had definitely crossed a line. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. No, Emma said softly. It was kind. Thank you. They drove in silence for a while. The rain grew heavier, drumming on the roof. Jack turned down a tree-lined street, taking the scenic route without being asked. Tell me about yourself, Jack, Emma said. You know so much about me now, but I know almost nothing about you. Jack smiled. Not much to tell. I grew up in a small town, moved to the city for college but dropped out when money ran low. Been driving ever since. No wife? Girlfriend? Jack shook his head. There was someone. It didn't work out. Why not? She wanted more than I could give at the time. A bigger house, nicer things. Emma nodded, understanding in her eyes. Some people think things bring happiness. And you? Jack asked. Does having all this make you happy? The question hung between them. Emma looked at the diamond bracelet on her wrist, twisting it around. I thought it would, she said finally. When I met Robert, I was struggling to pay rent and buy art supplies. He offered security, luxury. I thought I was being practical. She looked out at the rain again. But you can't hang security on a wall and admire it at night when you're alone. Jack wanted to reach for her hand but didn't. Instead, he drove a little slower, extending their time together. When they finally reached the mansion gates, Emma turned to him before getting out. Would you like to see my paintings sometime? I keep them in the garden house. Robert never goes there. Jack knew he should say no. This was more than a friendly invitation, but looking at her hopeful expression, he couldn't refuse. I'd like that very much. Emma smiled, a real smile that lit up her eyes. Tomorrow then. Robert has a business trip. As she walked to the house, Jack watched her go, knowing things had changed between them. The line was blurring, and he wasn't sure he wanted to redraw it. The garden house stood at the far end of the property, hidden behind tall hedges. It was smaller than Jack expected, a simple stone building with large windows. Emma unlocked the door, looking nervous as she led him inside. No one comes here except me, she said. Not even the staff. I clean it myself. Sunlight streamed through the windows, lighting up the room. Canvas paintings leaned against the walls, some hanging, others stacked carefully on the floor. An easel stood by the largest window, a half-finished painting of the ocean on it. You still paint? Jack said, surprised. Emma nodded. When I can, when Robert travels, she gestured around. This is my real home. Jack moved slowly around the room, studying each painting. Landscapes, as she'd said, but also some portraits. All carried deep emotion. Loneliness in an empty beach. Longing in a sunset over mountains. Sadness in the eyes of a woman looking out a window. These are beautiful, he said honestly. You have real talent. Emma stood close to him now, watching his face. Do you really think so, or are you just being kind? I wouldn't lie about this. Jack turned to her. Why hide such a gift? She shrugged, looking down. Robert said art was for people who couldn't do real work, that it was dreaming without purpose. Jack frowned. He's wrong. This is your purpose. He pointed to a painting of rain falling on city streets. This makes people feel something. That matters. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. She wiped them away quickly. Sorry, no one has seen these in years. Jack wanted to comfort her but kept his distance. He was too aware of who she was, who he was. Why did you want to show me? Emma didn't answer right away. She walked to a small table and poured 2 glasses of wine. Handing one to Jack, she said, because you really see me. Not Mrs. Taylor, not Robert's wife. Just Emma. Their fingers touched as he took the glass. Neither pulled away for a moment. I shouldn't be here, Jack said softly, but didn't move toward the door. Probably not, Emma agreed. But I'm glad you are. They sat on the small couch, looking at the paintings, talking about art and dreams. Emma showed him her sketchbooks, filled with ideas for future works. Jack told her about his own dream of owning a small bookstore someday. The wine loosened their words, made them laugh more easily. I've been saving, Jack said. A few more years and I might have enough for a small place. What kind of books would you sell? Emma asked, her eyes bright with interest. Classics mostly, poetry, art books. He smiled. The kind that make people feel something. Emma's hand found his on the couch between them. I'd like to see it someday. Jack looked down at their hands, then back to her eyes. The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken feelings. He should leave now, before something happened they couldn't take back. As if reading his thoughts, Emma slowly pulled her hand away and stood up. I should get back to the house. The staff might wonder where I am. Jack nodded, relieved and disappointed at the same time. Of course. As they walked back through the garden, dark clouds gathered overhead. The air felt heavy, promising rain. Neither spoke, both aware of the moment that had almost happened. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Emma looked up at the sky. I love storms. They make everything feel alive. Jack watched her face, how it lit up at the sound. He wanted to remember her just like this, free, natural, herself. The first drops fell as they reached the main house. Emma stopped at the side door, turning to Jack. Thank you for today, she said, for seeing my work, for understanding. Thank you for trusting me, he replied. The rain started falling harder. Emma's hair began to dampen, little drops clinging to the strands. Without thinking, Jack reached out to brush a raindrop from her cheek. His hand lingered there, cupping her face gently. Emma didn't move away. Her eyes met his, filled with confusion and longing. Thunder crashed louder now, but it couldn't match the storm building between them. I should go in, Emma whispered, but didn't move. You should, Jack agreed, his voice rough. Instead, Emma leaned slightly into his touch. Her lips parted slightly. Jack knew he was crossing every line, breaking every rule, but he couldn't stop himself. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned down. Their lips met softly at first, hesitant and questioning. Then Emma made a small sound, somewhere between a sigh and a sob, and the kiss deepened. Jack's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. Emma's hands moved to his shoulders, then his neck, then tangled in his hair. The rain soaked them both, but neither noticed or cared. In that moment, there was only the warmth of their bodies pressed together, the taste of wine on their tongues, the release of weeks of growing tension. 3 days passed without Jack seeing Emma. Robert had returned from his business trip, and Jack only drove him to and from meetings. Each time he asked about Emma in what he hoped was a casual way. Mrs. Taylor isn't feeling well, Robert said the first day, barely looking up from his phone. Women and their headaches, he said dismissively the second day. By the third day, Robert didn't even answer, just grunted when Jack asked if Emma would need the car. Jack couldn't stop thinking about the kiss. The way Emma had melted against him, the small sounds she made, how perfect it felt despite being so wrong. At night he lay awake, torn between guilt and desire. He had crossed a line that could cost him his job. Worse, he had potentially complicated Emma's life. On the fourth day, Jack arrived at the mansion to find Emma waiting by the car. His heart jumped at the sight of her, dressed in a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back. "Good morning, Jack," she said, her voice formal, but her eyes saying much more. "I need to go shopping today." Jack nodded, opening the car door for her. "Of course, Mrs. Taylor." Robert emerged from the house just as Emma was getting in. "Oh, you're finally feeling better," he said, sounding more annoyed than concerned. "Don't forget we have dinner with the Wilsons tonight." Emma's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I remember. I'll be back in time." Jack kept his face neutral as Robert looked at him. "Make sure she's back by 4. The dinner is important." "Yes, sir," Jack said, closing Emma's door and walking around to the driver's side. They drove in silence until they were through the gates and onto the main road. Jack glanced at Emma in the rearview mirror. She had chosen to sit in the back today. "Where would you like to go?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Anywhere," Emma said softly. "I just needed to get out of that house." Jack nodded, taking a road toward the shopping district. The tension in the car was thick. "Emma," he finally said. "About the other day. Could you pull over somewhere private?" she interrupted. "Please." Jack found a quiet spot in a park overlooking the bay. Few people were around on this weekday morning. He parked and turned off the engine. Emma moved to the front seat and faced him. "I've been thinking about what happened." "Me too," Jack said. "I crossed a line, Emma. I put you in a difficult position." Emma shook her head. "We both crossed that line." She looked down at her hands. "I've been hiding in my room these past days, not because I was sick, but because I couldn't face you or Robert." "I understand if you want me to resign," Jack said, his chest tight at the thought. "No," Emma said quickly, reaching for his hand. "That's not what I want at all." Her touch sent warmth up his arm. Jack looked at their joined hands, then back to her face. "What do you want, Emma?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I just know that when you kissed me, I felt alive for the first time in years." Her voice trembled slightly. "I felt seen." Jack squeezed her hand. "You deserve to be seen, Emma. You deserve to be happy." "And what about you? What do you want?" Jack took a deep breath. "I want things I shouldn't. Things that could hurt people." Emma moved closer. "Tell me." "I want to kiss you again," he said honestly. "I want to see your paintings and hear you laugh. I want to know what makes you happy and sad. I want—" "What?" Emma whispered. "I want you," Jack said simply. "But you're married to my boss." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I haven't been happy with Robert for a long time. Even before you came along, we're just going through the motions now." "Have you tried talking to him?" "Many times. He's always too busy or he dismisses my feelings." She wiped away a tear. "The only time I feel real anymore is when I'm with you or when I'm painting." Jack reached out, touching her face gently. Emma leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. He brushed away a tear with his thumb. "We could just drive away," Emma said suddenly, her eyes opening. "Right now. Go somewhere new." Jack smiled sadly. "And then what?" "Live looking over our shoulders? That's not the life you deserve." "Then what do we do?" Emma asked, vulnerability in her voice. Instead of answering, Jack leaned forward and kissed her softly. Emma responded immediately, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, all the longing of the past days pouring out. Jack's hands moved to her waist, feeling the warmth of her body through the thin dress. Emma made a small sound of pleasure as Jack's lips moved to her neck. Her hands slid into his hair, her breathing quickening. The windows of the car began to fog slightly from their heat. "I've thought about this every night," Jack whispered against her skin. "About you." "Me too," Emma admitted, pulling his face back up to kiss him deeply. Weeks passed, and Jack and Emma fell into a dangerous pattern. When Robert was away on business, Emma would ask Jack to take her to the garden house. There, surrounded by her paintings, they would talk for hours, share kisses, and hold each other. When Robert was home, they exchanged secret glances and brief touches when no one was looking. The guilt never fully left Jack, but it was drowned by the joy he felt with Emma. She smiled more now, her eyes brighter. She had started painting again with new energy, finishing more works in these few weeks than in the past year. One evening, Jack drove Robert home from a late meeting. The house was dark except for a light in Emma's studio upstairs. "Emma and I are going to the lake house this weekend," Robert said as they pulled up to the door. "She doesn't know yet. It's our anniversary." Jack's stomach tightened. "Congratulations, sir." Robert sighed, not getting out of the car right away. 8 years, he said, sounding tired rather than happy. "Sometimes I wonder if she's still the woman I married." Jack gripped the steering wheel harder, saying nothing. "She's been different lately," Robert continued, surprising Jack with this sudden openness. "More distant, but also happier somehow." He shook his head. "Probably those painting classes she started taking again." Jack kept his face neutral. "I'm sure she appreciates you noticing, sir." Robert made a dismissive noise. "Women need attention. I've been busy building this company, providing for us. She doesn't understand the pressure." He opened the car door. "We'll leave Friday morning. Make sure the car is ready by 8. "Yes, sir," Jack said, his heart sinking at the thought of Emma and Robert together for a romantic weekend. Later that night, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's me. Can you talk?" Jack's heart raced as he called the number. Emma answered on the first ring. "I stole your number from Robert's contact list," she explained quickly. "I needed to hear your voice." "It's risky," Jack said, though he was happy she called. "What if he checks your phone?" "He never does. He trusts me completely," Emma said, her voice tinged with guilt. "He told me about the lake house, for our anniversary." Jack closed his eyes. "I know. He mentioned it." "I don't want to go," Emma said softly. "Not without you." "Emma," Jack sighed, "he's your husband." A long silence followed. "Do you know what Robert gave me for my birthday last month?" "A credit card with a higher limit." Her voice cracked slightly. "Not a card with a message, not something personal, just money to spend." Jack wished he could hold her. "I'm sorry. You know what hurts most? He thinks that's what I want. He doesn't know me at all anymore." Another silence stretched between them. "What are we doing, Jack?" Emma finally asked. "Where is this going?" It was the question they had both avoided for weeks. Jack took a deep breath. "I don't know. I just know that when I'm with you, everything makes sense. When we're apart, I count minutes until I see you again." "I feel the same," Emma whispered. "But I'm married. We're sneaking around, lying, hurting someone who doesn't deserve it." "Do you love him?" Jack asked, the question he'd been afraid to ask. Emma didn't answer right away. "I loved who he was or who I thought he was. Now we're like strangers who know each other's habits." "And us?" Jack asked, his heart pounding. "With you, I feel real again," Emma said. "When you kiss me, when you look at my paintings, when you just listen to me, I feel like myself, not someone's wife or someone's trophy." Jack closed his eyes, picturing her face. "After this weekend, we should talk. Really talk about what we want, what's possible." "I'm afraid," Emma admitted. "Afraid of hurting people, afraid of losing you, afraid of staying in a marriage that died years ago." "I know," Jack said. "I'm afraid too, but we'll figure it out together." They talked until late, making plans to meet tomorrow before the weekend trip. By the time they hung up, Jack felt both lighter and heavier. Something had to change. They couldn't continue like this forever. The next day, Jack arrived at the mansion early. Emma had asked him to drive her to a final fitting for a dress, a cover story for them to have time alone. As he waited in the driveway, Robert unexpectedly emerged from the house. "Jack, good. I need to go to the office first. Emma will meet us at the lake house tomorrow instead." Robert got into the back seat. "Something came up that can't wait." Through the window, Jack saw Emma appear at the door. Their eyes met briefly before Robert's phone rang, distracting him. Emma's face showed confusion, then understanding as she saw Robert in the car. The drive to the lake house with Robert was tense, though Jack tried to hide it. Robert spent most of the trip on business calls, barely acknowledging Jack's presence. The few times their eyes met in the rearview mirror, Jack felt a strange unease, as if Robert was studying him. They'd arrived at the lake house in the afternoon. It was beautiful, glass and wood perched on a hill overlooking clear blue water. Jack carried Robert's bags inside, trying not to think about Emma arriving tomorrow, about her and Robert celebrating their anniversary in this romantic setting. Put those in the master bedroom, Robert instructed, pointing upstairs. Then come back down. I need to discuss something with you. Jack's heart pounded as he carried the bags up. Had Robert discovered something? The secret calls? The stolen moments? He steeled himself as he returned to the main room, where Robert stood by the large windows, looking at the view. Beautiful, isn't it? Robert said without turning. Yes, sir. Very beautiful. Robert turned, his face unreadable. Jack, how long have you been working for me now? Almost 3 months, sir. Robert nodded slowly. Emma seems to like you, says you're reliable, a good driver. He walked to a bar cart and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, offering one to Jack. She mentions you sometimes. Jack took the glass carefully, alarm bells ringing in his head. I try to do my job well, sir. I'm sure you do. Robert sipped his drink. You know, I've been watching my wife lately. She seems different, happier. Jack said nothing, his mouth dry despite the whiskey. At first I thought it was the painting. She's doing that again. Robert swirled his drink. But then I noticed other things. She hums to herself. She's more distant with me, but also less angry. He looked directly at Jack. Like she's getting something she needs, but not from me. Jack forced himself to maintain eye contact. Sir, Robert held up a hand. I'm not finished. He set his glass down and picked up his phone. I had my security team install cameras at the house 2 weeks ago. Standard security upgrade, I told Emma. He turned the phone screen toward Jack. Want to know what they caught? Jack's blood froze as Robert played a video. It showed the garden house from a distance. Emma and Jack entering together. The video had no sound, but it clearly showed them through the windows, standing close, talking, Emma showing him paintings. Then the video cut to them leaving hours later, holding hands briefly before separating at the main house. Sir, I can explain, Jack started, his voice tight. No need, Robert said, his tone surprisingly calm. The cameras didn't catch anything inappropriate. Yet, he put the phone away. But I know my wife. I know the look she gets. Jack set his untouched whiskey down. I'll resign immediately. That would be the honorable thing to do, Robert agreed. But I have a different proposal. He sat down, gesturing for Jack to do the same. I want you to stay. Keep driving for me, for Emma. Continue exactly as you have been. Jack stared, confused. I don't understand. It's simple, Robert said, leaning forward. Emma is happy. When Emma is happy, my life is easier. No complaints, no arguments, no emotional discussions I don't have time for. You want me to... Jack couldn't even finish the sentence. I want my wife to be satisfied, Robert said coldly. And I want my life to run smoothly while I focus on what matters, my business. If you're providing something she needs, fine, just be discreet. Jack felt sick. And if I refuse? Then I fire you, obviously, and I make sure Emma knows why. Robert smiled without warmth. How do you think she'd feel, knowing you cost yourself a job because of her? Knowing I'm aware of your little garden house visits, she'd be humiliated, ashamed. Jack's hands clenched into fists. You don't care about her at all, do you? I care about her in my way, Robert shrugged. We have an arrangement that's worked for 8 years. I provide everything she could want materially. If she needs something else now, attention, affection, whatever, and you can provide it, I'm practical enough to allow it. She's your wife, Jack said, barely controlling his anger. Not a problem to be managed. Robert laughed. You're young. Idealistic. You think love is all soaring hearts and passionate kisses. Real marriages are practical partnerships. Jack stood up. I need to think about this. Take your time, Robert said, checking his watch. Emma won't be here until tomorrow. Oh, and Jack, don't tell her about our conversation. It would only upset her. Jack walked out to the car, his mind racing. He sat behind the wheel but didn't start the engine. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Are you there yet? I miss you. Jack drove through the night, his headlights cutting through darkness as rain began to fall. He called Emma twice, but she didn't answer. His message was simple. We need to talk. Please meet me at the garden house when I get back. Dawn was breaking when he pulled into the mansion's driveway. The house was quiet, most windows still dark. Jack's body ached from the long drive, but his mind was clear. He knew what he had to do. He walked to the garden house, hoping Emma had gotten his message. The door was unlocked. Inside, he found her sitting by the window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in soft pinks and golds. She turned when she heard him, her face showing surprise and relief. "Jack," she stood quickly. "What happened? Why did you come back?" Jack crossed the room and took her hands in his. "Robert knows about us." Emma's face paled. "What? How?" "Security cameras. He's been watching us." Jack led her to the small couch. "He showed me footage of us coming here together." Emma's hands trembled in his. "Did he fire you? Is he going to divorce me?" "No. That's why I had to come back." Jack took a deep breath. "He offered me a deal. He wants me to keep seeing you in secret. He said when you're happy, his life is easier." Emma stared at him, confusion turning to understanding, then to anger. "He what?" "He doesn't want to lose you as his wife, but he doesn't want to put in the work to make you happy either." Jack squeezed her hands. "He treats you like a problem to be managed, not a person to be loved." Tears filled Emma's eyes. "All these years I thought he just didn't understand what I needed, but he does understand, he just doesn't care." She pulled her hands away, wrapping her arms around herself. "I feel so stupid." "You're not stupid," Jack said. "You wanted your marriage to work. There's nothing wrong with that." Emma stood, walking to her paintings. She touched one canvas. A dark, stormy sea. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing yet. I came straight here to see you." Jack joined her. "Because this isn't just my decision, it's yours too. Maybe mostly yours." Emma turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "What do you want, Jack? Really want?" "I want you," he said simply, "not as some secret arrangement, not as my boss's wife I see on the side. Just you, Emma. The woman who paints, who loves storms, who sees beauty in the world that others miss." Emma reached up, touching his face. "I want that too. But it's complicated. If I leave Robert, it won't be easy," Jack acknowledged. "I don't have much to offer, just myself." "That's more than Robert ever gave me," Emma said softly. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their choices heavy between them. "I could go back to the lake house," Jack finally said. "Tell Robert I accept his deal. Buy us time to figure things out." Emma shook her head. "No more lies. No more sneaking around." She took a deep breath. "I'll talk to Robert when he gets back. Tell him I want a divorce." "Are you sure?" Jack asked, his heart racing. "I've never been more sure of anything." Emma stepped closer. "I've been living half a life for years. I want a whole life now, with you, if you'll have me." Jack pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I know it won't be easy. People will talk. Robert might make things difficult." "I don't care," Emma said against his chest. "We'll face it together." Jack tilted her face up to his and kissed her deeply. This kiss felt different from their others, not stolen or secret, but a promise, a beginning. When they pulled apart, Emma smiled. "I should pack some things. I don't think I should stay here once I tell him." "Where will you go?" Jack asked. "I have a friend who'll help." After that, she looked around the garden house. "Maybe I'll find a place with good light for painting. And room for books?" Jack asked with a small smile. "Definitely room for books." Emma reached for his hand. "Will you help me pack?" They walked through the morning garden toward the main house, hand in hand for the first time without fear of being seen. As they reached the side door, Emma stopped. "What about your job? Your plans for the bookstore?" Jack smiled. "I'll find another job. The bookstore dream is still there, just maybe with a little art gallery attached now." Emma's eyes lit up. "I'd like that." She squeezed his hand. "I'm scared, Jack, but I'm also more excited than I've been in years." "Me too," he admitted. "But whatever happens next, we face it honestly, together." As they entered the house, the morning sun broke fully through the clouds, flooding the rooms with golden light. Emma led Jack upstairs to help her pack away her old life and begin a new one, not as Robert's wife or Jack's secret, but simply as herself, with a man who loved her for exactly who she was.